I'm Avery Sullivan, and the last shovel of dirt hitting the ground was supposed to be the end of the worst chapter of my life. My grandmother, Helen Ellis, was 78, and we buried her that morning in a small cemetery outside Seattle where the trees lean close and the air always feels a little colder than it should. People hugged me, told me she was in a better place, said all the polite things people say when they don't know what else to do with grief. I nodded, thanked them, tried to keep my face calm, but inside I felt hollow, like someone had taken a part of my chest and left a clean space where her voice used to live. Then, as the last few cars started pulling away from the graveside, her lawyer stepped toward me like he'd been waiting for the crowd to thin. Graham Caldwell was the kind of man who always looked composed, even at funerals, suit pressed, tie perfect, eyes sharp behind thin glasses. He didn't offer condolences. He didn't ask how I was holding up. He leaned in close, so close I could smell the faint mint on his breath, and he whispered, "Your grandmother didn't die naturally, Avery. If you want the truth, come to my office after everyone leaves. But whatever you do, don't tell your father or your brother. You could be in danger." He didn't wait for my reaction. He straightened up, nodded once like we'd discussed something boring like parking validation, and walked away. I just stood there, staring after him with my heart hammering so hard it felt like it was shaking my ribs. My brain tried to reject what I'd heard. It tried to shove it into the same mental drawer as grief, exhaustion, stress, all the things that can make you feel paranoid when you barely slept and you've been crying for 2 days straight. But something about his voice, the flat certainty of it, made it impossible to dismiss. While everyone else drifted toward their cars, I lingered near the edge of the parking lot like I was still saying goodbye, pretending to adjust my coat, pretending to search for something in my purse. Really, I was watching. My father stood close to Vanessa, the woman he'd married 2 years ago, the woman who always smiled like she was performing for a camera. They were slightly apart from the others, near the fresh mound of dirt, their heads angled toward each other. I couldn't hear everything, but the damp air carried just enough. Vanessa said something low and urgent, "If she goes at the right time," and my father muttered back, "The papers have to be done before anyone starts asking questions." A cold wave slid through me. The words weren't grief. They weren't even the strange kind of family tension that sometimes rises when someone dies and money enters the room like an extra guest. It sounded like planning. My mind started flicking through little moments from the last few months, things I had noticed but explained away because I didn't want to see anything ugly. Grandma locking a drawer she never used to lock. Changing the lock on her bedroom door and calling it just in case, like she was joking, but her eyes weren't joking. The way she'd started keeping her mug close to her, like she didn't want anyone touching it. I'd told myself it was old age. A need for control. Anxiety. Anything but fear. After the cemetery, we returned to my father's house in a quiet suburb outside Seattle. The living room still smelled like the casseroles neighbors brought over, that heavy mix of cheese and sympathy. I was still in funeral clothes when my father called me in and sat across from me with a thick stack of papers on the coffee table like he'd been waiting all day to do this. "These are just standard documents," he said, tapping the top page. "Healthcare and financial power of attorney. Your grandmother would want us to make sure you're protected. You've been through a lot." Vanessa hovered nearby, arms folded, her smile gentle but tight. "It's just responsible," she added. "Sign where the tabs are, and you won't have to worry." I picked up the first page. The language was dense, soaked in legal terms that made my eyes blur. But one clause cut through the fog. Substitute decision-making. If I was deemed unable to manage my affairs, they could step in. They could make decisions for me. I looked up. "What exactly does this cover?" My father waved a hand like I was being dramatic. "It's routine. You don't need to read every line. We're family." Vanessa's eyes stayed on me, and it wasn't warmth I felt. It was measurement. Like she was watching to see how much I understood. I set the papers down. "I'm exhausted. Can we do this tomorrow?" "I just need to sleep." My father nodded too quickly, almost relieved. Vanessa's smile tightened for a second, then snapped back into place. Of course, sweetheart. Take your time. As I stood to leave, she touched my shoulder. Her fingers were cold. Upstairs, my old bedroom looked the same as it always had, like a little preserved space my grandmother kept ready for me. The wall still had the hook where she used to hang my childhood drawings when I visited. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at it, my throat tight. My mind kept replaying those words at the cemetery. If she goes at the right time. The papers have to be done. It was like someone had opened a hidden door and now I couldn't unsee the room behind it. A week before my grandmother died, I visited her, and she pulled me aside in her kitchen when my father stepped out to take a call. Her hands were warm, but she gripped mine with an urgency that didn't match her calm voice. If anything happens to me, she said quietly, promise you'll look after yourself. Don't let them rush you. Who? I asked, half laughing because I didn't want to take it seriously. She didn't laugh. She just squeezed my hands and said, promise. I had promised. That night in my childhood room, I locked my door. I'd never done that in this house, not once. I lay down fully dressed, listening to the low murmur of my father and Vanessa downstairs, words too quiet to catch. Sleep didn't come. Every time I started to drift, my brain jolted awake with the same thought. What if Grandma was trying to warn me? What if she knew something I didn't? The next morning, I woke up early. My father was already in the kitchen making coffee like nothing had happened. Vanessa poured a cup and handed it to me with a smile. You must be exhausted, she said. Drink this. It'll help. I took the cup, but I didn't sip. I set it down on the counter, suddenly aware of how normal her tone sounded, how practiced it was. I need to run an errand, I said. My father glanced up. What kind? I want to check on Grandma's house, I replied. Make sure everything's okay. His expression shifted, just slightly. A pause too long. Then he nodded. Okay. Be quick. Vanessa watched me leave like she was memorizing my movements. Grandma's house was only a short drive away. A small place she'd lived in for 40 years, the kind of house that held history in the walls. The air inside was stale, but familiar. I walked through slowly, touching the teapot on the stove, the photo albums on the shelf, the little things that made it feel like she might walk in any second and ask if I wanted cookies. In her bedroom, my eyes went straight to the drawer she always kept locked lately. The lock was still there. My heart thumped as I remembered where she hid the key, under a loose floorboard near the bed, like she never fully trusted any lock to protect her. I lifted the board, found the key, and opened the drawer. Inside were papers, bank statements, insurance documents, and a small notebook. I opened it and felt my stomach tighten. Her handwriting was neat and careful, but the entries were unsettling. Notes about mornings when her heart raced. About tea tasting bitter, almost metallic. About feeling unwell after breakfast. And then lines that made my skin go cold. Vanessa insisted on making it today. I don't feel safe. If I go suddenly, check the tea. Protect Avery. My hand started shaking so badly I had to grip the edge of the dresser. This wasn't a random old person diary. This was someone tracking patterns, trying to prove something to herself without saying it out loud. I closed the notebook and pressed it to my chest, breathing through the panic. I didn't know what it meant yet. I didn't have proof. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't signing anything. That evening, once the house went quiet again, I waited until I was sure Vanessa and my father were asleep. Then I slipped out, drove through empty streets toward Graham Caldwell's office, and tried not to let fear make the steering wheel feel like it was moving under my hands. The building was dark except for a single light in the lobby. I parked, walked up, and before I could knock, the door opened. Graham pulled me inside without a word and led me down a hallway to his office at the back. And that's when I saw him. A man sitting in one of the leather chairs like he'd been waiting for hours. He had the kind of eyes that looked tired in a way sleep wouldn't fix, like he'd seen too much and learned to keep his face neutral about it. He stood when I entered, not smiling. Graham closed the door behind me and said, "This is Jonah Reed. Your grandmother hired him a few months ago." Jonah gave a small nod. "Avery." My throat felt dry. "Hired him for what?" Jonah leaned forward slightly. "To watch quietly. To test something she was worried about. She didn't want police. She didn't want a public fight. She wanted answers." Graham slid a folder across the desk toward me. "Before we go further," he said, voice low, "you need to understand something. Once you see what's inside, you won't be able to unsee it." I stared at the folder, my pulse pounding, thinking about my father's calm face in the kitchen, Vanessa's cold fingers on my shoulder, my grandmother's notebook hidden in a drawer like a secret. Then I reached out and opened it. The first thing I saw in the folder was how clinical the truth looked on paper. No dramatic accusations, no bold statements, just a lab summary stamped with dates and reference numbers, the kind of document that doesn't care who your family is. It listed the contents of an herbal tea sample my grandmother had submitted for private testing. Most of it was normal. Chamomile, lavender, a few roots I couldn't pronounce. Then one line sat there like a quiet threat, an unidentified compound not consistent with the blend, further analysis recommended. I stared at it until the words blurred. My brain kept trying to negotiate with reality. Maybe it was contamination. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe someone at the lab messed up. Anything that didn't require me to believe that the woman who baked cookies for my brother and me, who kept Band-Aids in every drawer, who hugged us like she could physically hold the world together, had been afraid in her own kitchen. Jonah didn't push. He watched me the way people watch someone standing at the edge of a cliff, not sure if they'll step back or jump forward. "She noticed the taste changed," he said calmly. "Bitter. Metallic. Then she started feeling off afterward. She didn't want to accuse anyone without proof, so she hired me through Graham." Quietly. Graham leaned against the window with his arms folded. He looked less like a lawyer in that moment and more like a man who'd been carrying something heavy on behalf of someone he respected. "She didn't want police," he added. "She didn't want to blow up the family. She was scared of what it would do, and she was scared of being wrong." My mouth felt numb. "So she just wrote it down?" Jonah nodded. "She documented everything. Dates, symptoms, who made the tea, who was in the house. She even saved small samples." I thought about the notebook in my bag, the way her handwriting changed toward the end, still neat but shakier, like she was fighting to keep control of the story. I forced myself to look up. "Why tell me now?" Graham's face tightened. "Because she left instructions. And because your father and Vanessa are already moving." The word moving made my stomach turn, because it matched what I'd overheard at the cemetery. "The papers have to be done before anyone starts asking questions." Graham crossed the room to a small safe tucked into the corner behind a cabinet. He spun the dial like he'd done it 100 times, pulled the door open, and took out a single envelope with my name written on the front in my grandmother's handwriting. My heart punched hard at the sight of it. Seeing my name in her script felt like being grabbed by the wrist across time. It was intimate and terrifying at once, because it meant she had planned for this, which meant she truly believed she might not get the chance to explain in person. Inside the envelope was a flash drive and a short note. "Avery, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Trust Jonah. The drive has recordings and notes. Don't let them take everything from you. Love, Grandma." The last 2 words almost broke me. I pressed my lips together, refusing to cry in that office because I needed to stay clear. Crying would come later. In the car, in the shower, at 3 in the morning when my mind finally slowed down enough to feel. Jonah slid another item toward me, a small sealed bag with a plastic vial inside. Tea leaves and a faint powdery residue clinging to the bottom. Ordinary looking, horrifying in context. "She saved that from her last batch," he said. "The lab flagged it. If we push further, we can get full results, but it takes time. Time. The one thing it suddenly felt like I didn't have. I plugged the flash drive into Graham's computer with shaking hands. A list of audio files appeared, dated over weeks. I clicked the most recent. My grandmother's voice filled the room, thin but clear, the sound of someone trying to stay composed for the sake of whoever might hear it later. She described her mornings, how she felt after tea, how her chest would tighten, how her hands would tremble, how she'd started pretending to drink it all while pouring some out when no one was looking. Then her voice softened, like she was speaking directly to me. If you're hearing this, it means I couldn't fix it in time. Please, Avery, don't let them rush you. Don't sign anything. Don't let them take you too. I shut my eyes, overwhelmed by the intimacy of it. She hadn't just been afraid. She had been fighting quietly, trying to leave breadcrumbs for me without starting a war she wasn't sure she could survive. When I opened my eyes, Jonah was watching me carefully. You don't have to do this, he said. You can walk away right now. You can let it stay buried and focus on your life. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. Because walking away meant I could go back to being the granddaughter who just missed her grandma, instead of the woman sitting in an office at midnight holding a vial of suspicious tea like it was evidence in a nightmare. But my grandmother had written my name on that envelope because she believed I wouldn't ignore it. I can't walk away, I said. Graham nodded once, almost relieved. Then we move smart. Jonah laid it out like a plan, not a story. I would go back to my father's house and act normal. Grief gives you cover, he said. People expect you to be distracted. We would use that cover to gather evidence. Confirm what the power of attorney actually contained. Monitor what happened in the kitchen. Learn whether my father knew or whether Vanessa was driving everything. And most importantly, protect me from being pushed into signing control away. I swallowed hard. They're going to notice I'm different. Only if you show them, Jonah replied. You keep your face calm. You give them what they want to see. Cooperative, tired, vulnerable. The word vulnerable made my skin prickle, because that was exactly the version of me Vanessa seemed to be waiting for. Before I left, Graham leaned closer. Do not confront them, he warned. Not yet. Not without proof. If they suspect you're onto them, they'll accelerate. I nodded, bag heavier now with the notebook and the flash drive. When I stepped outside, the street was quiet, wet from rain, the air smelling like pavement and cold pine. I sat in my car for a full minute before turning the key, breathing slowly until my hands stopped shaking. The drive back felt longer than it should have. Every red light felt like a spotlight. Every car behind me felt like a follower. By the time I pulled into my father's driveway, I had my face under control, grief on the outside, fire contained on the inside. Inside the house, my father was in the living room scrolling through his phone like the world wasn't cracking open. Vanessa was in the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel, her smile already in place. Everything okay, Avery? She asked. I forced a small smile. Yeah. Just needed air. Her eyes flicked, quick, to my bag. Not long enough to be obvious, but long enough to be telling. Then she nodded like a doting stepmother and turned back to the counter. Upstairs, I locked my bedroom door and leaned against it, listening. My heart was beating too loud in the quiet. I pulled out my phone and typed a message to my brother, Connor, then deleted it. Then typed again. Then deleted again. I couldn't pull him into this yet. Not until I knew what he knew, or didn't know. My grandmother's note had warned me about my father and my brother, and I hated that it included him. But warnings aren't always accusations. Sometimes they're just calculations of who might be safest to keep in the dark. The next day, I created my window. At breakfast, I suggested something sentimental, something that would sound like grief, not strategy. I want us to do a proper dinner for Grandma tonight, I said. Her favorite meal. Like she would have wanted. My father softened immediately. That's a good idea. Vanessa hesitated, just a flicker, then smiled. Of course. What do you need? I want fresh ingredients, I said. The big market downtown has better herbs. Better meat. Grandma always said fresh makes the difference. Vanessa's mouth tightened. That's kind of far. Please, I said quietly, letting my eyes shine just enough to sell it. It'll make me feel like I did something right for her. My father nodded. Let's go. We drove into Seattle, and I dragged the trip out like my life depended on it, because it did. I examined herbs too long. I asked clerks questions I already knew the answers to. I read labels. I compared bottles. I doubled back to aisles because I forgot something. Vanessa's impatience grew like pressure in a sealed jar. She checked her watch, sighed, tried to hurry my father along. He stayed oddly agreeable, maybe relieved that I was cooperating and not fighting about papers. By the time we returned, it was dark. And in that window, while we were gone, Jonah's team did what they needed to do. 2 small cameras, discreetly placed, one in the kitchen corner with a view of the counter, one in the living room angled toward the seating area. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious. Just enough to see who moved where, who handled what, who watched me. That night, I didn't sleep. The next morning, Vanessa offered me tea. It was the same tone as the day before, the same gentle performance. Want some? It'll help you relax. I sat at the table and watched her turn her back to the stove. My stomach tightened so hard it hurt. I didn't want to be right. I wanted this to be paranoia. I wanted the cameras to capture nothing but harmless routine so I could feel stupid and guilty and relieved all at once. She reached for the tin of loose tea. The kettle heated. She moved with practiced ease. Then, as if she'd done it 1,000 times, she stepped slightly out of direct view and I heard a faint clink, something small being opened. My throat closed. I stood up slowly, pretending to get a glass of water. As I moved past the counter, I saw it. A small vial in her hand. A pinch of pale powder tipped into the teapot with a motion so quick it almost looked casual. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard it made me dizzy. I kept walking. I filled my glass. I sipped. I turned back with my face calm, like nothing had happened. Vanessa poured a cup for me first, smiling. Careful, it's hot. I wrapped my hands around the mug and stared at the steam rising like it was mocking me. Somewhere, on a screen, Jonah was watching. Somewhere, the camera was recording. But in that moment, I was sitting at my father's table with poison pretending to be comfort. And I knew the next move would decide everything. I sat there with the mug in my hands, steam curling up toward my face, and every instinct in my body was screaming at me not to drink it. The smell was familiar, comforting even, which somehow made it worse. This was the same tea my grandmother had trusted for years. The same ritual she'd repeated every morning, never imagining it could be used against her. I felt sick thinking about how many times she must have sat exactly where I was sitting now, feeling something was wrong but forcing herself to stay polite, to stay calm, to stay quiet. Vanessa watched me closely. Not obviously. She was good at subtlety. Her eyes flicked from my face to the cup and back again like she was waiting for a signal. My father sat in the living room scrolling through his phone, detached, unaware, or pretending to be. I still didn't know which was worse. I lifted the mug slightly, enough that she could see me complying, then winced and set it back down. Sorry, I said softly. My hands are still shaky this morning. She leaned in just a little. You really should drink it while it's warm. I will, I said. I just need a minute. That minute stretched into several. I talked about nothing. About the weather. About how quiet the house felt without Grandma. Vanessa nodded, murmured sympathetic sounds, but her attention never left that cup. Every few seconds her eyes darted to it, like she was counting the time it sat untouched. I couldn't let this drag on forever. The camera angle Jonah had described wasn't perfect. It showed the counter clearly enough, but if someone argued later that the powder was sugar, a supplement, something harmless, doubt could creep in. I needed more. I needed certainty. I needed them to make another move. So I did something risky. I stood up abruptly, bumping the table on purpose. The mug tipped and spilled, hot tea splashing across the wood and dripping onto the floor. "Oh my God," I said, stepping back. "I'm so sorry. I'm such a mess today." Vanessa's face tightened for half a second before she masked it. "It's fine," she said quickly. "Don't worry about it." "Can you make another one?" I asked, my voice small. "Please. I really do want it. I can't get anything right today." She stared at the spill, then at me. Something passed behind her eyes, irritation maybe, calculation. Then she smiled. "Of course. Let me clean this up first." As she wiped the table, my heart pounded so loudly I was sure she could hear it. If she refused, if she decided not to remake it, I'd lost my chance. If she did remake it and repeated what she'd done before, I'd have proof layered on proof. She refilled the kettle. This time, I stayed close. Not hovering, but near enough that I could see her hands clearly. She waited until she thought my attention was elsewhere, until I pretended to check my phone, then reached again for the vial. The movement was faster this time, more confident. The powder disappeared into the teapot like it belonged there. I felt something inside me snap into focus. She poured the second cup and slid it toward me. "Try this one." I took it. My fingers were shaking for real now. I brought it close to my mouth, enough that the heat touched my lips, enough that she'd believe I was about to drink it. Then I set it down gently. "Tastes a little off," I said. "Maybe it's the new blend." For just a second, her smile cracked. "Just a hairline fracture, but I saw it." "Probably," she said. "Herbal mixes can be unpredictable." My father finally looked up. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I said quickly. "Just tired." He nodded and went back to his phone. I carried the mug into the living room and set it on the coffee table, still untouched. Vanessa followed, sat beside my father with her own cup, and watched me over the rim as she sipped. I could feel the pressure building, like she was waiting for me to make a choice. Drink it, or don't. I didn't. Instead, I let silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Then I spoke. "Grandma knew," I said quietly. Vanessa froze. My father looked up, confused. "Knew what?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My hands were steady now. Calm in a way that surprised even me. I opened the app Jonah had set up and turned the screen toward them. "Watch this," I said. The video played. Vanessa at the counter. The vial. The powder tipping into the teapot. Clear enough that there was no mistaking it for sugar or accident. Clear enough that intent screamed from every frame. My father's face drained of color. His mouth opened, then closed again. Vanessa lunged toward me instinctively, reaching for the phone. "Turn that off," she hissed. I pulled it back. "It's already saved. Multiple copies." "That's not what it looks like," she said, her voice sharp now, panic leaking through the cracks. "Daniel, tell her." My father stared at the screen like it was something unreal. I didn't know," he whispered. "Avery, I swear, I didn't know." Vanessa laughed, high and brittle. "Don't lie now. You planned it. You wanted the house, the insurance." "I just did what you asked." "No," he said weakly. "Stop. That's not true. I didn't let them spiral." I kept going, my voice steady. Grandma wrote everything down. The symptoms. The taste. The way she didn't feel safe. She saved samples. She left recordings. She knew someone was poisoning her. Vanessa's eyes darted to the door. To the windows. To anywhere but me. The papers you pushed me to sign, I continued. They weren't just about helping me. They gave you control. They would have let you declare me unfit and manage everything. You wanted me next. That was when she really broke. She lunged again, knocking over a chair. You don't know what you're talking about. I do, I said. And so do the police. The front door burst open. The sound was deafening. Officers flooded in, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Vanessa screamed and dropped to the floor, hands over her head. My father raised his arms slowly, tears streaming down his face. I didn't move. I didn't speak. My brother Connor came running down the stairs, eyes wide. What's happening? One officer gently held him back. Stay here. Connor looked at me, his face crumpling. Avery? They hurt Grandma, I said softly. They tried to hurt me too. He shook his head in disbelief, staring at our father, who couldn't meet his eyes. They took Vanessa away first, still shouting, still blaming my father. He followed in silence, shoulders slumped, like the weight of everything had finally crushed him. The house filled with movement. Evidence bags. Photos. Questions. Jonah arrived shortly after, coordinating quietly with the detectives. He gave me a small nod, nothing dramatic, just acknowledgement. When the last officer left, the house felt hollow. Connor sat beside me on the couch, crying quietly. I held his hand, feeling the same protective instinct Grandma must have felt. I didn't know, he kept saying. I swear. I know, I said. She protected you. That night, I packed a bag. I left the next morning without looking back. Months later, in a cold courtroom in Seattle, the sentence was read. Life without parole for my father, named the primary orchestrator. Vanessa received less time in exchange for cooperation, but her future was gone all the same. Connor sat beside me, gripping my hand, silent. Afterward, on the courthouse steps, he asked me what I was going to do. I'm leaving, I said. But I'll keep Grandma's house. I'm going to turn it into something good. I did. The house became a refuge for women escaping abuse. A place to breathe. A place to be safe. I moved to Portland and started over quietly, working with a nonprofit, helping families navigate crisis before it destroyed them. I keep Grandma's teapot on a shelf. Not as a warning. As a reminder. Leaving that house felt different than I expected. I thought there would be relief, some dramatic sense of escape, but what I felt instead was a heavy calm, like my body had finally stopped. Bracing for impact. I didn't cry when I closed the door behind me. I didn't look back at the driveway or the windows or the place where everything had quietly gone wrong. I just drove. The days after the arrest blurred together. Interviews. Statements. Long conversations with detectives who spoke gently but asked questions that cut straight through me. I answered everything honestly, even when my voice shook. I owed my grandmother that much. I owed myself that much too. Every time doubt tried to creep in, every time my mind tried to soften what had happened, I remembered the notebook. The recordings. The look on Vanessa's face when she realized she'd been seen. Connor stayed with a friend for a while. We talked, but carefully. He was grieving too, in a different way. Losing a father who was still alive but suddenly unreachable does something strange to a person. I didn't push him. I didn't ask him to choose sides. Grandma hadn't wanted that for him. She had tried to keep him untouched by the worst of it, and in a way, she had succeeded. The court process moved faster than I expected. The evidence was overwhelming. The lab results came back conclusive, confirming the compound found in the tea wasn't accidental, wasn't harmless, wasn't something that could be explained away. Watching the legal language catch up to what my grandmother had known in her bones was both validating and devastating. She had been right. And she had been alone. When the sentence was finally read, I felt empty, not victorious. Justice doesn't feel triumphant when it comes wrapped in loss. It just feels final. My father didn't look at me as they led him away. Vanessa did, her eyes sharp even then, like she was still searching for leverage. I turned my head before she could say anything. Whatever she wanted to tell me no longer mattered. After the trial, I stood in Grandma's house alone for the first time without fear. The rooms felt quieter, but not haunted. More like they were waiting. I walked through each one slowly, touching the furniture she'd chosen, the photos she'd framed, the small imperfections that made the place hers. In the kitchen, I picked up the teapot and held it in both hands. It felt heavier than it should have. That was when I knew what I wanted to do. The house had been a place of warmth once, a place where people felt safe enough to sit, to talk, to rest. It deserved to be that again. I reached out to a local organization that helped women leave dangerous situations, and within weeks we had a plan. Bedrooms became temporary shelters. The living room became a counseling space. The backyard, which Grandma had always loved, turned into a quiet place to sit and breathe. I used part of the inheritance to fund it, not as a gesture, but as a continuation of who she had been. Connor visited once, standing in the doorway like he wasn't sure he was allowed inside anymore. We walked through the house together. He listened as I explained what it would become. He nodded, eyes wet, but he didn't argue. She would have liked this, he said quietly. I know, I replied. Moving to Portland was less about running away and more about choosing space. I found a small apartment near the river, nothing fancy, just quiet. I started working with a nonprofit that helped families untangle financial and legal crises before they turned into something darker. The work grounded me. It reminded me that while I couldn't save my grandmother, I could help someone else feel less alone. There were nights when the weight of it all came back. When I lay awake replaying moments, wondering if there was something I should have noticed sooner, something I could have said that would have changed the outcome. Those thoughts never led anywhere good, but they came anyway. Healing isn't linear. It's a series of returns to the same questions until they lose their sharpest edges. Connor and I settled into a cautious rhythm. Short phone calls. Updates about work. Nothing too heavy. We both understood the boundaries without having to spell them out. Family didn't mean pretending nothing happened. It meant acknowledging the damage and choosing not to let it spread further. One afternoon, months later, I received a letter from a woman who had stayed in the house. She wrote about sitting in the kitchen late at night, drinking tea she knew was safe, finally sleeping without fear. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it beside Grandma's notebook. It felt like a quiet kind of closure. I wasn't the same person I'd been before the funeral. I didn't expect to be. But I was still myself, maybe more honestly than ever. I trusted my instincts now. I listened when something felt wrong. I no longer confused politeness with safety or silence with peace. Grief changes shape over time. So does strength. The strange thing was that life didn't slow down after everything ended. It kept moving, almost impatiently, like it was waiting to see whether I would keep up or stay frozen in what had happened. At first, that felt unfair. How could the world keep spinning when so much had been destroyed so quietly? But over time, I understood something important. Life moving forward wasn't a betrayal of my grandmother. It was proof that what she tried to protect still mattered. Portland gave me space in a way Seattle never could again. The river near my apartment became part of my routine. Long walks in the early morning, when the city was still half asleep and my thoughts were loud but manageable. I learned how to sit with silence without it feeling dangerous. I learned how to be alone without feeling abandoned. The work at the nonprofit grounded me more than I expected. Every family that walked through the door reminded me that crisis doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it shows up in paperwork, in exhaustion, in a quiet sense that something isn't right. I helped people slow things down, read what they were being asked to sign, understand the power they still had even when they felt overwhelmed. Each time I did, it felt like I was finishing a conversation my grandmother never got to have out loud. The house back in Seattle took on a life of its own. Women came and went quietly, carrying stories they weren't ready to share publicly. Some stayed only a few nights. Others stayed longer. I didn't visit often. I didn't need to. Knowing it existed was enough. Knowing it was safe was enough. The teapot stayed there, on a shelf in the kitchen, no longer something to fear, just an object that held memory without pain. Connor and I kept our distance in a way that felt respectful, not cold. We talked about neutral things, work, weather, plans that didn't involve the past. Occasionally, something heavier slipped through, a sentence about missing her, about wishing things had been different. We didn't rush to fix those moments. We let them pass naturally. That was the best version of family we could manage now, and it was enough. There were moments when guilt tried to resurface. Not about what I did, but about what I survived. Survivor's guilt wears strange disguises. It asks why you were the one who noticed, the one who listened, the one who made it out. I stopped arguing with those thoughts and started answering them simply. Because someone had to. Because she trusted me. Because silence would have cost more. I never went back to the cemetery. I didn't need to. My grandmother wasn't there. She was in the notebook. In the recordings. In the choices she made when she realized she might not have time left. She didn't leave me a peaceful ending. She left me responsibility. And in doing that, she also left me strength. People sometimes ask how I knew something was wrong. I never give them a dramatic answer. I tell them the truth. It wasn't one big moment. It was a pattern. A feeling that didn't go away when I tried to ignore it. A quiet voice that kept saying slow down, look closer, don't let them rush you. We're taught to silence that voice, especially when it involves family. We're taught that love means trust without question. But real love doesn't require blindness. It doesn't demand obedience. It doesn't punish awareness. Walking away wasn't easy. Staying would have been worse. I built a life that feels honest now. Smaller in some ways, but stronger where it counts. I sleep well. I don't flinch when someone offers me help. I read every document put in front of me. I listen to my instincts even when they're inconvenient. And when I think of my grandmother, I don't picture her at the end. I picture her writing in that notebook late at night, steadying her hand, choosing truth over comfort. I picture her trusting me enough to leave the rest unfinished. That trust changed everything.